Welcome to the Week 18 Sports Betting Picks video here at FTN Bets, otherwise known as Betting with Benny. We are going to be going through the opening lines at DraftKings and FanDuel, and then talking about some of the playoff scenarios that we have this week. And we're going to be starting with that Tampa Bay and Atlanta game. Tampa Bay Buccaneers 8-8 on the year, taking on the Atlanta Falcons, who are 6-10 on the season. Tampa Bay already clinched the NFC South, so they're going to be the fourth seed in the playoffs in the NFC. So they really don't have anything to play for here. There's, not much that they could do. They're not going to be able to improve anything. They're going to be the fourth seed, win, lose, or draw here, so it doesn't really matter for them. As for Atlanta, they're already out of the playoff picture. Depending on how the last week turns out, probably going to end up somewhere with the 7th or 8th draft pick here. When I break everything down, I get Tampa Bay should be favored by about 4 points. Atlanta is favored by 7, which basically tells you that the Atlanta starters are going to be sitting. And this is the game I wanted to start with because I want to explain to you guys that motivation means a lot more for the Lions this week than anything else. Like I said, Tampa Bay has no motivation to win this game. You may not see Tom Brady play here. You may see some of the wide receivers only play maybe a couple snaps. It's going to be treated like it's a preseason game. So even though in a normal situation, I would have Tampa Bay favored by about 4 points in this game, I understand why Atlanta is favored by 7 if Tampa Bay is going to be playing their backups. And this is what I want to point out. These are the kind of games we need to avoid this week. There's going to be games that I'm going to talk about where both teams have something to play for, or there's something on the line, or maybe one team is just young and is going to have their normal team out there anyway. This is not one of those games. You are going to get a whole bunch of backups, third-string players for Tampa Bay, probably on both sides of the ball. Avoid this game at all costs. Like I said, if you want to bet Atlanta, go ahead, be my guest. I try to stick to things that I know. I have no idea what's going to happen here with Tampa Bay playing all their backups. So the next game we're going to talk about, this is an interesting one. New England Patriots taking on the Buffalo Bills. New England is 8-8. Currently, they own the number 7 seed if the playoffs were to start today. Miami Dolphins are also 8-8, and the Pittsburgh Steelers are 7-8, and they are playing as we talk here on Sunday Night Football. So they could wind up 8-8 as well, which would make it 3 teams vying for that last playoff spot. New England does control their own destiny, although they're going to need the win to control that destiny. They're taking on the Buffalo Bills, who are 12-3 at the moment. Buffalo plays Monday Night Football against Cincinnati. Buffalo is basically the 1A seed in the AFC right now. If they beat Cincinnati in that game, they'll be tied with Kansas City at 13-3. Kansas City does have the tiebreaker, so I think Buffalo would still be number 2. But there's another game. So if Kansas City loses next week, Buffalo wins this game against New England on top of winning that game against Cincinnati, then we could see something here that might actually matter. So really, as you know, there's a lot of things that could matter making this game, important or not important. Buffalo could be anywhere from the number 1 to the number 3 seed, depending on how things work out in the next 2 weeks. There's no line on this game on DraftKings or FanDuel because we still have to wait for the Monday Night Football game with Buffalo and Cincinnati to see if either of these teams is going to have something to play for. I would think that Buffalo against New England should be more than a touchdown. Minus 7.5 is the number that I made it. We'll see what it is when it comes out. Next game up, Minnesota against Chicago. Minnesota 12-4. They are the NFC North champions here. Let's see. Philly's 13-3. San Francisco's 12-4. So theoretically, Minnesota could still move up here. Even Dallas, I think. Dallas also has a chance to wind up getting the number 1 seed. So all these teams are still in play here, which gives Minnesota something to play for here next week. Chicago is 3-13. I think Chicago Bears fans would rather see them lose. Currently, they have the number 2 pick in the draft, and if they lose, they're going to stay there. If they lose and Houston wins, I think they do still have an outside shot at the number 1 pick in the draft. But again, one way or another, they're going to be picking up pretty highly here. So when I break this down, I get, Minnesota minus 7. I don't get this line at all because DraftKings has it at minus 1.5. FanDuel has it at minus 2.5. I don't know. Am I too low on Chicago? Maybe is that the reason? But unless I see something that Minnesota's sitting there, guys, I think there's a lot of value on taking Minnesota minus 1.5 right now over there on DraftKings. Like I said, Minnesota still actually has some things to play for. So I don't understand why they're saying Minnesota's going to sit. Again, you want to be the 2 seed if you can get the 2 seed because then you get a home game in the second round of the playoffs. So I don't see Minnesota just rolling over and not wanting to try to win this here. So this line was a little weird to me. Like I said, I think it should be Minnesota minus 7. DraftKings has it at 1.5. FanDuel has it at 2.5. Obviously, I'd rather go to DraftKings and just lay the 1.5 with them, but I like Minnesota minus 1.5. Next game up, this is an interesting one too. Baltimore against Cincinnati. So if Baltimore beats Pittsburgh here tonight and Buffalo beats Cincinnati tomorrow, then next week this would actually be basically the AFC North championship game because both of those teams would be sitting at 11-5 with one game left to play. If Baltimore loses tonight, then they're going to go to 10-6. If Cincinnati wins tomorrow, then they'll be 12-4, 11-5, something like that. So Cincinnati would basically have the inside track, and this game may not mean anything. So it's really tough to break it down at the moment, knowing that there's a chance this game could mean a lot. There's a chance that this game might not mean anything, and that could mean that we're sitting some of the starters. So really, we're going to have to wait to Tuesday to see how that Monday Night Football game works out between Cincinnati and Buffalo. A really good one I'm looking forward to watching tomorrow night. So let's see here. If I'm breaking this game down, I should get Cincinnati is favored by -6. But again, that Cincinnati favored by -6, assuming that both of these teams win the next two games that they play here. Or actually, I'm sorry, assuming that Baltimore wins and Cincinnati loses, because then this would be the NFC Championship game next week. It'd be the AFC North Championship game next week, and it would be in Cincinnati. So they should be favored by more than a field goal, more like -6 points. We'll have to see what it is when the numbers come out there. As you guys know, there's a lot of stuff going on here with these games and who can win and who can lose. So trying to break it all down this way, you guys know which games are important. This is one I would bet on if Baltimore wins and Cincinnati winds up losing on Monday night. So let's see here. We got the Detroit Lions and the Green Bay Packers. Interesting scenarios in this game with Seattle. Both Detroit and Green Bay are at 8-8. If Green Bay wins this game, Green Bay is going to be the final NFC playoff team. If Green Bay loses this game, then Detroit will be 9-8, but Detroit will not automatically be in. They will need a Seattle loss. So basically, Green Bay needs to win this game. They control their own destiny. Detroit needs to beat Green Bay in this game and still get help from Seattle in order for them to move on. So with that being said, when I break this down, I get Green Bay probably about 3.5 to 4 points better on a neutral field. Factor in home field advantage, I get Green Bay -6. FanDuel and DraftKings have this at -4.5. So for me, I think there's some value on Green Bay. I just don't think that's enough points there. Again, I think it should be -6. So Green Bay -4.5. I think there's a little bit of value on that number right there. I have no problem laying 4.5 with Green Bay. Next game up is going to be Houston and Indianapolis. This is one of those games that doesn't really matter for either team. Let's see. Houston with a loss, I guess it matters for them. I mean, if they lose, they clinch the number one overall pick. They'll have the worst record in the league. They'll be 2-14-1, and they'll be the team picking number one overall. Indianapolis 4-11-1 on the season. They're probably going to draft somewhere in the 3 to 6 slot. Again, not anything they could do playoff-wise, but we'll have to see what happens with them overall and where they end up and how some of the other teams go here. So when I break this game down, I get Indianapolis -5. DraftKings and FanDuel only have it at -2.5, and I don't think that's enough points here. I don't even care who the quarterback is. Nick Foles, Sam Ehlinger, whoever they want to throw back there. It doesn't make a difference to me. I just don't think Houston is a very good team right now. Some of their better players are actually injured, and this is a team that couldn't afford to be losing anybody. So Indy -5, it's only -2.5. But it is juiced up to -115, meaning it's very likely at some point to maybe go up to that -3 number. So I want to take that Indy -2.5 right now before we get to that -3 number. That's the way that I'd be looking at this game. So next game is going to be my New York Jets taking on the Miami Dolphins. Jets got knocked out of the playoffs with that loss that they had to Seattle this week. They are 7-9 on the year. Probably going to end up drafting somewhere in the 10 to 12 slot. Miami, as we discussed earlier, they're going to need to win, and they're going to need some help. But the first part of that is winning. So they do have some motivation to come play in this game. When I break the numbers down in this game, they're going to need a win and a loss by New England in order for them to get into the playoffs. And again, New England plays Buffalo, who needs to win as well. So that loss is not a crazy thing. So Miami, with a win over the Jets, does have a chance to get in. I think Miami should be favored by 5 points here. The number on FanDuel and DraftKings is -3. Both of them have it at -3, -115, which means it's more likely to go to 3.5. So right now, I think you should lay the -3 with Miami before that number moves up and you lose the hook. If you have to lay the hook, I wouldn't be touching it. But at -3, I think there is some value on Miami. I don't think that's enough points here. And again, I'm a big Jet fan, and I still don't think it's enough points. Next game up, Carolina against New Orleans. Again, another game that doesn't have any playoff implications. Carolina 6-10 on the year, probably going to finish somewhere in draft position like, I don't know, maybe 7-10 or so. New Orleans 7-9 on the year, probably going to draft somewhere between 9 and 12, depending on how these games work out. When I break it down, I get New Orleans -5. DraftKings has it at -5. FanDuel has it at -4.5. Not really any value on this one. Not much to talk about here. We're going to skip over that. Next game up, the New York Giants against the Philadelphia Eagles. The New York Giants clinched the wild card spot. Number 6 is the worst that they're going to wind up here in the playoffs. They really don't have much to play for here next week. And you can tell that they have nothing to play for here next week because I wouldn't have made the line this high if they did actually have something to play for. With that being said, Philly, they lock up the number 1 spot with the win here in this game. So they do have something to play for. Philly is -14 against the New York Giants. And what that tells me is the Giants are probably going to rest a bunch of their guys out here. Again, do I think Philly's going to blow them out? If that's the case, then yes. But you know what? I don't really want to lay a lot of points. I mean, Philly hasn't looked good the last couple of weeks without Jalen Hurts in there. Assuming Jalen Hurts doesn't play again and Gardner Minshew's in there. We don't know that for sure right now. But, either way, I mean, the Giants have nothing to play for. It's a 14-point game. I don't really want to touch this one right now. This is one of those games where one team's motivated, the other team's really not motivated. I don't want to. This is going to be like a backdoor cover kind of thing, and I don't want to touch it at all. Next game up, Cleveland Browns taking on the Pittsburgh Steelers. So, depending on what happens on Sunday Night Football, this game may or may not matter. Now, again, obviously it matters, whatever. But if Pittsburgh wins on Sunday Night Football against Baltimore, then they still have a chance to make the playoffs. If they lose, then they're out of the playoffs. So it doesn't really matter anyway for them one way or another. There's no line on this game yet because they are playing on Sunday Night Football. And I think that's kind of the way the books wanted it. I mean, basically, until they know whether or not next week's going to matter, they're not going to take any risk one way or another. So there's not really much to talk about on this game. Assuming Pittsburgh does win, I would say they deserve to be favored by at least a field goal. It'll probably open at 3.5 or so. Anything above that is probably too many points. Anything below that, you definitely want to be on the Pittsburgh side. Next game up, Dallas Cowboys, Washington Commanders. I almost said Redskins, but I didn't. I got it, Quan. I caught myself that time. So let's see. Dallas, 12-4 on the year. They technically, I think, can still win the NFC. If Philadelphia manages to lose to the Giants and Dallas manages to beat Washington, I think they actually pull ahead of Philly, not only for the potential to win the NFC East, but also maybe for the number 1 overall seed. So obviously Dallas, cares what happens here. Washington is eliminated from the playoffs. They're probably going to draft somewhere around 11 or 12th. Not really any motivation here, although they are at home and it is what it is. Let's see. I get Dallas about 8 points better. Factor in home field advantage. -6 for Dallas. DraftKings agrees. They have it at -6. FanDuel has it at -6.5. So I don't really think there's any value here in this number. That's where I would have it as well. Pretty much on market. Next game up, Los Angeles Chargers, Denver Broncos. Chargers are currently the 6th seed in the playoffs. They've locked up their playoff spot. They may be able to get up to the number 5 seed. Baltimore would need to lose. I think Baltimore might need to lose both of these games or at least one of these games to open the door for them. So we'll have to see how that all works out. I guess they're slightly motivated, I would say. I mean, I don't know if they're going to sit any of their guys. I would assume they're playing, but, we'll have to wait and see how that works out. If that is the case, I have the Chargers should be favored by about 2.5 points here. FanDuel has -3, juice down to -106. DraftKings has it at 3.5, juice down to -105. So FanDuel juice down -3, -106. I mean, again, I got it at -2.5, so it's still more points. It's not as many since it's juiced down to -106, but I'd rather get a win. If it was 2.5, I would probably bet it. At -3, I don't know. I mean, we're pretty much on market, right? I mean, the Chargers very likely need to win. We'll have to see. Maybe the way the Baltimore game works out would give me a little more one way or another, but not really going to go nuts with that. Kansas City, the current number 1 seed in the AFC, they clinch with a win. They could also technically clinch. Buffalo and Cincinnati would have to win out, right? And Buffalo and Cincinnati play each other this Monday night, so one of them is going to get a loss. So theoretically, the Chiefs could either win to clinch their spot or they could lose, and they would need at least one loss from Buffalo and Cincy each. So whoever wins the game on Monday Night Football tomorrow would have to lose the game next week in order for Kansas City to back into the number 1 overall seed. But Kansas City doesn't have to worry about that if they just go out and win the game. They're taking on 4-12 Denver there. Denver likely to draft somewhere between 3 and 6. They're taking on Las Vegas, who's 6-10, likely to draft somewhere between 7 and 12. I get Kansas City should be favored by about a touchdown here. FanDuel and DraftKings have it at 9.5. It's too many points for me to bet on Kansas City, but it's still not enough points to get me to take the Raiders right now. I know the Raiders look pretty decent and Stidham played pretty well. And, maybe there is a little bit of value on the Raiders side at 9.5 plus 9.5 here, but I'm not really touching the Raiders side. I have nothing to do with it. The only way I would have bet this game would have been to bet on Kansas City, who may need this win to lock up their number one seed. I just don't want to lay 9.5 points. I just think that's too many points right here. So I'm going to be staying away from this game. Los Angeles Rams, Seattle Seahawks, next one up. Rams, nothing to play for, 5-11 on the year. They're going to draft somewhere between 4 and 8. But you know what? You're going to get the same Rams team next week that you've had this week, basically. Like, Baker's going to be the quarterback. Cam Akers probably still going to play. He's pretty fresh. They're without Cooper Kupp, but all those other guys will probably be into play in this game. So I didn't really make any adjustments downward here for the Rams, even though that they don't really have anything to play for. They haven't really had anything to play for 3 or 4 weeks, and we already kind of made adjustments. So I think they're going to be what they are. As for Seattle, again, the door is now open for Seattle. So Seattle's 8-8. Green Bay has to lose their game to Detroit in order to open the door completely for Seattle. And if that does happen, then Seattle can get in with the win. So that games are going to go off at the same time. So Seattle's not going to know whether or not they need to win or lose. So basically, they're going to try to win this game. So I think Seattle is a team that we can look at here. Here's the problem I have, right? Like when I break this all down, I get Seattle should be favored by like maybe 2.5 or 3 points. The number is Seattle -6 on FanDuel and 6.5 on DraftKings. So they've already factored in the fact that the Rams have nothing to play for. Again, I think the Rams are more dangerous than that. So for me, I actually like Rams plus 6.5 more than I like laying 6 on FanDuel with Seattle here. Do I think Seattle wins this game? Probably. I just think 6 is too many points. I mean, I don't think it's going to be very high scoring. I think the Rams defense is still pretty solid. I think the Rams offense has played a lot better. Like, they could be one of those teams that plays spoiler and, maybe helps Detroit get in there, because Detroit to get in would have to beat Green Bay and would need the Rams to beat Seattle. So I know Detroit is really hoping that the Rams come to play, but I like Rams plus 6.5 more than I like laying -6 on FanDuel with that Seattle Seahawks team. Next up, last 4 o'clock game, I think, Arizona against San Francisco. Arizona is 4-12 on the year. They're probably going to draft somewhere around 3 or 4 in the draft when that all works itself out. San Francisco at 12-4. So they would need a win and a Philadelphia loss to get the number 1 overall seed. They could have the number 2 or number 3 overall seed, depending on if they win and Minnesota wins, or if they lose and Minnesota wins, and how that all breaks out. So again, at the end of the day, the important thing for us is that San Francisco is going to want to win this game. They do have the motivation to go out and do so. The problem is it's a massive spread. I agree with the spread, though. I got San Francisco should be favored by 13 in this game at home, and DraftKings and FanDuel also have 13, so there's no value there. So that brings us to the most interesting game, and the one has been flexed to Sunday night at 8 o'clock. There is no Monday night football game. I think it's going to be a Sunday night 8 o'clock is going to end the 2022-2023 NFL season, and that game is going to be the Tennessee Titans taking on the Jacksonville Jaguars. Tennessee 7-9 on the year, Jacksonville 8-8. This is basically a winner-take-all game for the AFC South. Championship game of the AFC South going to be going on right here between Tennessee and Jacksonville. Now, again, a couple things we got to talk about. Derrick Henry sat out week 17 so that he would be available in week 18. So Derrick Henry will be playing for Tennessee. Ryan Tannehill, though, is on injured reserve, so he will not be playing. Who's going to be quarterbacking them? I'm not even really sure. Maybe it is Josh Dobbs. Maybe it's Malik Willis. I mean, I think basically, one of those two guys is going to be leading this team here. Did Dobbs do enough in his week 17 audition to get the start here? Do they want to go with the kid, even though, this is a big game here? So be interesting to see how that works out. I don't really think either one of them makes them much better. I think the two of them are basically even. So I didn't make really any adjustments. If anything, I would probably adjust it down a little bit if Malik Willis is the starter, but it would be like half a point at most. So it wouldn't really make much of a difference. So when I break this down, let's see, I get Jacksonville is better anyway by about 2.5 points on a neutral field. Jacksonville's not a neutral field. They're actually playing at home. I get the Jags should be favored by about 4.5, 5. DraftKings and FanDuel have this at 6.5. I just think that's too many points. So this is another one where do I want to play Tennessee plus 6.5? No, I don't want to play that at all. But 6.5 is too many for me to lay on Jacksonville either. So this is going to be the nightcap game. It's the last game of the season. If you're really trying to make some money on it, I mean, again, the value, the numbers, I think is on the Tennessee side. Jacksonville minus 4.5. That would be the number I want. At 6.5, it's probably just too many points. So there you go. That's going to wrap it up for our Week 18 sports betting picks video, along with all the playoff scenarios. Make sure you guys get over to FTN Bets once we have the results of that Sunday and Monday night football game. Once we have some more news about which guys are going to be sitting or not, these lines are going to start moving, which is why I wanted to break everything down at the beginning of the week for you guys so that you can be on top of which way the potential line movements might go and lock in some good numbers while you can. For my man, my dog, my producer, Quan, this is Benny Ricciardi signing off for Betting with Benny.